The Society of Women Engineers is celebrating Women's History Month by exploring some of the fun stories found in its archives. Today, let's look at Ruth Shafer, SWE's fundraising dynamo in the 1950s and 60s, whose trademark humor and hustle helped grow the Society's bank account as well as its ambitions. In 1958, SWE was 8 years old and had roughly 650 members. The society was run by volunteers who were buckling under the weight of membership applications, business correspondence, and media inquiries. In order for SWE to grow, it needed an executive secretary to handle daily business and an office for her to sit in. Unfortunately, all it could afford was part-time secretarial help and a mailbox in the engineering building in New York City. In 1958, plans were underway to build the United Engineering Center in Midtown Manhattan. But to get a headquarters office there, SWE would need money, lots and lots of money. And it would need an audacious person to raise it, the kind of person who, as described in 1971, quote, is always willing to accept any task and refuses to acknowledge the possibility of failure, end quote. That person was Ruth Irene Shafer. The salutatorian of her 1930 high school class, Shafer's dream of studying medicine was stymied by her family's finances. Instead, she studied French at the University of Wisconsin, hoping for an interesting career in the Foreign Service. But she learned too late that the U.S. State Department did not hire female diplomats in the early 1930s. So, after graduating in 1934, she attended and later taught at a secretarial school and worked as a credit manager, a bookkeeper, and an accountant. However, she became interested in engineering when she was hired at a coal furnace company in 1941, and by 1950, she had worked her way up from secretary to vice president of the Special Controls Division of 2 furnace distribution companies. She opened her business in 1953, designing the installation of HVAC units and creating her own line of equipment. She closed the business in 1957 and joined naval architecture and engineering company Gibbs & Cox as a design engineer, where she remained until 1971. Shafer's experience in entrepreneurship and accounting, as well as her ability to move past disappointment, showed exactly the kind of determined ambition SWE needed in fundraising. She joined the Metropolitan New York section of SWE in 1956, and by 1958 had been appointed chairman of the Society's Development Committee. In the August 1958 issue of the SWE newsletter, Shafer wrote an article titled "Take Me to Your Drafting Board," in which she laid out the board of directors' vision for the society: increased membership and prestige, an employment service, a magazine, an outreach program for students, and a national headquarters in the new United Engineering Center with a paid executive secretary. To fund both the immediate and long-term costs of operating a headquarters office, the Society launched a capital campaign called the SWE Drive to raise $250,000. This was wildly optimistic because the Society only had $1,700 in the bank at the time. To prevent members from becoming discouraged by the monumental task, Shafer reminded them in a rebus that big trees from little acorns grow. To meet the goal, Shafer encouraged members to solicit donations from, quote, any and all individuals of your acquaintance exuding the delightful aroma of solvency, end quote. As part of the drive, Shafer asked each member to donate $20 a year and awarded a trophy to the section with the best fundraising track record. To meet their fundraising goals, SWE sections held fashion shows and bake sales, card parties and cookouts. They sold candy, slide rules, and toothbrushes. She also encouraged members to solicit donations from their employers. And she successfully courted SWE's first two corporate members, Bell Labs and General Electric. Meanwhile, if there was a way to make $1 or $2 for the drive, Shafer found it, earning her the moniker Ruth $Shafer. She turned President Katherine Eiden's birthday into a fundraising challenge. She raffled off vases, gardening gloves, and convention registration fees. She turned the amount raised in these schemes into its own raffle at the cost of $1 per guest. And she had no compunction about making a spectacle of herself at the national conventions, dressing up as an organ grinder, an astronaut, and doing push-ups for cold, hard cash. She debuted her signature auction at the 1960 convention, which became an entertaining and lucrative tradition that decade. Then Vice President Naomi McAfee described Shafer's auctioneering skills in 1971, recalling, quote, "At one particular meeting, Ruth was selling something, probably a genuine fake Dior or Margaret Pritchard shoes or possibly Olive Salambay's socks, to Doris McNulty. She asked Doris, 'Do you bid 55? The answer was, no. Do you bid 56? The answer was, yes. The look on Doris's face was priceless when she realized what she had done." End quote. In the end, the society fell far short of its $250,000 goal, but it did raise enough money to move into a one-room, 343-square-foot office in the United Engineering Center in September 1961, and to hire Winifred White as its first executive secretary. Shafer soon redirected her energies to the society's next audacious plan, hosting the first International Conference of Women Engineers and Scientists in 1964. As the convention and the operations chairman, she coordinated volunteers and committees, searched for sponsors, and otherwise kept the conference moving forward. The first ICWIS was a wild success, with more than 500 registrants and 100 guests, which was quite impressive considering SWE had never had more than 90 attendees at any of its previous conventions. And of course, Ruth $Shafer held another auction at that first ICWIS. The secretary left a note in the 1964 membership meeting minutes explaining that, quote, "For those who have not witnessed an RS auction, I couldn't possibly describe it. For those who have, any words of mine would be superfluous." End quote. Shafer auctioned the ring off Italian SWE member Anna Amore's hand and raised $12 from a pair of sandals that she found in the lost and found bin. She enticed someone to bid $10 on a 50-cent coin and tricked a previous victim of her auctions into bidding $50 when there was no actual item up for bid. Proceeds from the auction were donated to help fund the next ICWIS, hosted by the Women's Engineering Society in Great Britain 3 years later. After receiving the Society's first Certificate of Recognition in 1971, Shafer wrote to President Olive Salambay, quote, "I can think of at least a dozen people who deserve it, but it never crossed my mind that I would." She continued later in the letter, quote, "But to me the greatest reward has been meeting, knowing, and becoming friends with the members throughout the country. 5 years ago, I could probably have met 90% of you unexpectedly on any street in the world and called you by name. Now, fortunately, we have grown, because without growth, decay sets in. So today, perhaps I could name only 50% of you. But by now, I have learned that if you are a member of SWE, we are the same kind of independently thinking people. We can disagree about anything, but we shall remain friends." End quote. Ruth Shafer, Decades later, from all of your friends at SWE, we thank you.